This video is Unit 5, learning targets 7 through 9, roundworms, annelids, and mollusks. So let's first talk about roundworms. There's a roundworm in all of its glory. Roundworms are unsegmented worms with a pseudocoelom and a full digestive tract. So unsegmented worms with a pseudocoelom and a full digestive tract. So let's talk about pseudocoelom. What is a pseudocoelom? Well, a pseudocoelom is an only partially lined coelom. Notice how there is a body cavity here, but the endoderm there in the center is not lined on the outside with the mesoderm. The inside of the ectoderm here is lined with this mesoderm, but the outside of the endoderm is not lined. And so this is a pseudocoelom, pseudo meaning false coelom. This is different than acoelomates because there's actually a body cavity here, but it's not a true coelom in that this body cavity is not completely lined with mesoderm or with this muscle layer. This coelom contains water, and this water helps to give the roundworm some structure, some firmness about it. So how does it carry on its essential functions? Well, for feeding, these roundworms have a full digestive tract, and the digestive tract has 2 openings. They feed on many different things. They're sometimes parasitic as well, and they can even be parasitic to humans. Respiration, circulation, and excretion depend largely on diffusion still, so we're still dealing with diffusion. Now, you can see here the digestive tract in this picture, starting here, and it goes through this whole digestive tube. And so this is a relatively new development in animals, having this full digestive tract like this. You can also see another kind of primitive brain there with the ganglia and the nerves that run the full length of the body, with a few sense organs able to sense their surroundings. For movement, they have muscle cells that extend the length of the body, and again, the fluid in the pseudocoelom helps movement. So you can imagine like a balloon, a balloon without anything in it. It's kind of flimsy piece of latex, but if you blow it up or if you fill it with water, it has some firmness to it, and that's very much like this roundworm. It's full of water, gives it some firmness. And for reproduction, For reproduction, they are male and female sexes with internal fertilization. So this is a little bit different than what we've dealt with in the past. With the flatworms, we had hermaphroditic, so they had both sex organs, so they were able to reproduce with anybody. Well, in this case of the roundworms, you have male and female worms, and they reproduce so that there's internal fertilization, whereas the sperm is placed internal into the female and fertilization takes place inside the organism. Now, roundworms are often associated with disease. A couple of examples of these are hookworms there on the left. Looks like everyone's favorite nightmare. And then trichinella, which is another type of worm that used to be found in pork more so. Used to, rather than now, pork is a pretty clean meat. It used to, it was fairly dangerous, and so this trichinella was the reason it was dangerous. Many kinds of roundworms can infect domestic pets, like heartworms. You've heard of heartworms before. Not a good thing. And so roundworms are typically associated with as disease-causing worms. The next kind of worm is annelids. Annelids are segmented worms with a true coelom, and this coelom is lined with mesoderm tissue throughout. So here's an example of this, the true coelom. You can see the difference between that and the coelom that we saw in the roundworm. See, the internal digestive tract is lined completely outside with the mesoderm as well as the ectoderm on the inside, and so you have this true body cavity. Don't worry about mesenteries because it's there big, just don't worry about it. But you can see the two body cavities there that are there for the worm. This allows for specialized regions of the worm, which in turn allows for specialized structures, creating a greater degree of fitness. And when we talk about fitness in the animal kingdom, fitness is just the ability to survive. And so what this has done, as far as evolution is concerned, has created a greater ability for these worms to survive and thrive. And so here are the segments of the earthworm with the many different kinds of structures. You can see the different organs, the sex organs and the skin and the gizzard and the intestines, the pharynx, all these different kinds of organs are allowed for with the segmentation of the body and the true coelom. Now, as far as their essential functions for feeding, annelids feed on everything from dead material, so they would be detritivores. They can feed on other animals. Here's a picture of a leech. This leech is feeding on the skin of some human here. And so leeches are examples of annelids as well. Respiration. Annelids have gills with which they exchange gases through diffusion. And so they have gills. This is a little bit different than what we've dealt with so far. And these gills require moisture, and they exchange oxygen and CO2, oxygen in, CO2 out, through diffusion. So very similar to the gills of a fish or the lungs of a, like our lungs or a dog or something like that, but not like a fish gill in that it requires to be underwater. It can just be on the land. Their circulation, they have a closed circulatory system. That means they have a heart that pumps blood throughout vessels in the body. So a closed circulatory system. For excretion, they have something called nephridia. I'll write that down. Anytime you see this neph, that means kidneys. And so nephridia are very much like a kidney that filters the blood, filters all the ammonia out of the blood so that it can be excreted out of the body. Don't worry about oligochaetes yet. We're going to continue on the essential functions. Response, they have a well-developed nervous system with nerve cords that go throughout the bottom or throughout the body. There's a particular kind of annelid called polychaetes that have well-developed sensory organs. We'll mention those shortly. Reproductive, earthworms in particular, these annelids are hermaphrodites, meaning they have both male and female sex organs. Some annelids have separate sexes and reproduce, and then some reproduce asexually as well. So they make the full gamut as far as reproduction is concerned. And then movement, they have two major groups of muscles that allow them to move. They can dig into the ground, so they're pretty strong in that regard. You've probably picked an earthworm up and you can feel that they're rigid. They have muscles in them. And marine annelids, or annelids that live in the ocean, have specialized appendages that allow them to move. Now, as far as groups of annelids, the oligochaetes are earthworms. This is normally what we think of an earthworm, oligochaetes. There are leeches. There's our leech picture again that everybody likes. They are parasitic and they are aquatic. And then there are polychaetes, And these polychaetes have these appendages on their side. You can actually see they look like little legs, but they're not so much legs. They're called setae. That's just these appendages there that allow them to move through the ocean and swim. Not mollusks yet. So how do they contribute to their ecosystems? So earthworms turn up the soil, break down material for better decomposition. And so earthworms are very important to ecosystems around this part of the country in particular. We depend on them to turn up the soil. Very good if you can have earthworms in your garden. They're good for aerating the soil and helping to break down the dead material. So moving on to mollusks. Mollusks are some of our favorite things to eat. Um, Mollusks are soft-bodied organisms with an external or internal shell. And so this is one of the things that separates mollusks. Some mollusks like to eat submarines, apparently. Mollusks have a particular kind of body plan that we'll discuss here, and their body plan has these same kinds of structures. Doesn't matter what sort of mollusks they are, and one of those structures is called the foot. Now, normally we think of a foot, when we think of foot, like my foot, my right foot, or my left foot, or a dog's foot. And you may have solved the word foot on your vocabulary list and be like, why do we have to know what this is? Well, in a mollusk, the foot is the muscular portion of the mollusk. So this is like the muscle portion. If you eat a mollusk, this is probably what you're eating. And this foot can be used to move, like a snail, or can be used to feed, like clams or something like that. So the foot is just the muscular portion of the mollusk. This is how they eat. This is how they move. They also have a shell, and this shell is for protection. It could be inside the mollusks, like a squid or an octopus, where the shell is actually on the inside, or like a clam or a snail, where the shell is on the outside. And they also have a radula, and this you can see it kind of here, and the radula is zoomed in here, and it's like this tongue, like a raspy kind of tongue. Looks like it has a chainsaw blade attached to it or something. And this tongue aids some mollusks in feeding. And so some mollusks have this radula that allows them to feed. And then lastly, what we have is gills. And you can see the gills here, and their gills are in the rear rather than the front. And what are gills? These are just specialized structures for respiration. So we'll use this same picture to talk about all their essential functions. Feeding, they're everything from filter feeders. A filter feeder just kind of filters the water around them like a sponge, like we talked about sponges, to predators that actually attack other organisms, hunt them down and eat them. Respiration, they use gills for gas exchange between oxygen and carbon dioxide. Gas exchange is a term that we'll use frequently, and that just simply means taking in oxygen, getting rid of CO2, exchanging those gases. Circulation, they have an open circulatory system. You can kind of see that here in this picture where they have a heart, but they don't have blood vessels that move throughout. They just kind of splash the blood everywhere. It's not really what's going on, but you can kind of get the idea, and the blood eventually makes it back to the heart and gets pumped out again. For response, some of them have very simple nervous systems like clams that can just detect light, and a few other things. Then you have this whole other end of the spectrum, very complex and intricate nervous systems like an octopus. Very complex, very intricate, all the different legs that are able to move. Their eyes are very complex. And so you run the full spectrum here with mollusks, very simple organisms all the way to extremely complex and smart organisms. For reproduction, sexual reproduction, some of them use external fertilization. meaning that they just put their gametes into the water, the sperm for the males and the egg for the females, and they fertilize, make eggs. Or some of them are hermaphroditic, meaning that they have both sex organs. And so no asexual reproduction with the mollusks, but some of them are external fertilization, some are hermaphroditic. And then again, movement. You have some that are extremely simple, like a snail. It just kind of pushes itself along the ground and very slowly and surely gets from point A to point B, to extremely complex, like an octopus or a squid. Very complex movement, very intricate. Um, and so you run the full spectrum with movement as well. Now there are different kinds of mollusks. We're going to mention some of the groups. First is gastropods. These are snails. Gastro, stomach, pod, foot. So they have what's called a stomach foot, and they literally just kind of move around on the ground. Next, there are bivalves. So these clams have two shells, so they're called bivalves, clams. And then cephalopods. Cephalopods, cepha means head, and pod is foot, so cephalopods are head foot. This is like an octopus or squid. There's a picture of a blue ringed octopus that has venom. Very, very lethal types of organisms. Now, how do they contribute to their ecology? Well, some of them do not contribute. They actually make it worse. Zebra mussels, as you see in this picture, there are mollusks that are an invasive species to some parts of the U.S., this being one of those parts. And this shows just some of the zebra mussels that have embedded themselves on the bottom of a boat. They can clog up drain pipes, they can clog up spillways, and so they've made water travel and waterways. It's much more complex dealing with this zebra mussel problem. And also, when the rivers go way down, the zebra mussels are exposed and it smells really bad because they all die. And so there's a lot of problems with the zebra mussels, and they were brought in on another ship. And so we call them an invasive species because they are not native to here, but they've invaded because of our accidental bringing them in. Now, some mollusks are filter feeders, and so that's a good thing for an ecosystem, and that they filter out the garbage out of a stream or out of a lake. And this allows those lakes to be healthier for the other organisms. And some mollusks are a source of food for humans, and so this is contributing to our own ecosystem in that we are able to get food from some of the mollusks.